A tectonic shift in the past 2 weeks in diplomatic policy over the recognition of a Palestinian state means that at least 3 G7 member states could soon recognize the territory as a state. Canada has joined France and the United Kingdom in announcing plans to back Palestinian statehood at the upcoming UN General Assembly in September. If they follow through on that, that would mean that 3 G7 countries are placing new pressure on Israel amid the ongoing war in Gaza. 14 other nations, including New Zealand and Australia, have signed a declaration signaling that they too may soon recognize Palestine as a state. Now, what does the recognition actually mean under international law? Who decides and what changes for Palestinians on the ground once these decisions have been made? Let's get into that conversation with Gustavo de Carvalho from the South African Institute of International Affairs. Good afternoon, and thank you for your times. So give us in simple terms, what do we mean when we say these countries are going to, quote unquote, recognize Palestine as a state? How does that fit in with how a state is recognized at international law?
Thank you very much. And what we have seen in recent days with the announcements from France, UK, and Canada really show a revival of discussions around the two-state solution between Palestine and Israel, with the thresholds of famine and many of the indicators of threshold of famine now being found, increasing number of people dying. We are seeing some important shifts in terms of the narratives and the pressure that is provided to Israel in terms of its actions within the Gaza Strip. And certainly what we will identify during the General Assembly in September, as you mentioned, it is a new momentum with plus minus 13 to 15 countries now recognizing Palestine as a state. We're now going to see over 80% of the UN membership doing so. Certainly, it does not yet changes the direction and the position of Israel's most important ally, the United States. We, in fact, have seen some immediate reactions towards Canada and the 25% tariffs then became a higher number since that announcement. But indeed, it is a movement towards, in terms of the increasing shift of views around the actions of Israel, but also in terms of increasing the isolation that Israel has internationally and the increasing pressure for changing of action in the region.
So just in terms of giving us the ABCs of recognition of a state, is it correct that, for starters, those are outlined, as I understand it, in the Montevideo Convention, if I'm not mistaken, of 1933. Is it correct that all along Palestine has actually ticked many of those requirements, but it was just a political decision, a diplomatic decision, that these countries were holding back, the ones that are now coming forward and giving this recognition?
Absolutely. And when we look into the Montevideo Convention, there is a number of criteria that the convention provides in terms of how a state can be recognized. You need a permanent population, a defined territory, a government, and particularly the capacity of entering international relations with other states. That recognition, to a large degree, it is part of a political process. It has been internationally part of that political process, and we see a number of cases of countries that could potentially fit those criteria, but do not have necessarily the wide recognitions from other countries. So in that sense, this last category of the capacity of entering into relations with other states is not only something that comes from the state itself, but also from how the rest of the international community is able to do so. So in that regard, we would still have a larger number of countries within the UN doing so. That increases the pressure. But until we're able to have the core support of permanent members of the Security Council, and particularly the United States in that sense, that becomes a much trickier position to do, but also acknowledging that even in the case of France, UK, and Canada. And I think France is the one that provides an unconditional type of
Yes.
recognition. But both Canada and the UK have set certain conditions in terms of what they would expect to see. In the case of the UK, they would like to see actions from Israel, both in terms of peace talks or a ceasefire. But in the case of Canada, there some reforms and some changes within the Palestinian Authority
Yeah.
and the condition of excluding Hamas in future government discussions within Palestine.
So, if you don't mind, I'd like for us to just go through those Montevideo requirements for recognition and sort of have them as a template on the one side and they have the Palestine on the other side. For instance, the issue of a permanent population. I don't imagine that there's any debate that Palestine, the area where the state is being claimed, has a permanent population.
Yes, you're right. If we're looking to the permanent population criteria, Palestine does have a clear, long-standing population that has been residing in Gaza, in the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. The defined territory, the United Nations in 1967, does create those boundaries and lines. That includes both Gaza and the West Bank. But we also have seen that fragmentation, and particularly within the West Bank and the occupation of different territories within the West Bank, that becoming harder. When we talk about the idea of the government, certainly the Palestinian Authority has been administering the West Bank for a number of years. Hamas, as part of the agreements between with Israel a number of years ago, that led to Israel leaving the Gaza Strip and eventually Hamas winning the elections. And of course, in terms of this capacity of foreign relations, we have seen the Palestinian Authority in Palestine with embassies and missions in different parts of the world, including the fact that Palestine currently has an observer status within the United Nations.
Perfect.
Now,
Yeah.
a lot of these issues bring some of the challenges that Palestine currently has, both in terms of the split between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas over the years, a very bitter competition between the two groups for a number of years, but also the Israeli occupation and the inability of Israel really to respond to many of the demands made by the UN General Assembly. We see now with the
Yeah.
provisional orders of the International Court of Justice as well. And to a large degree, I think the absence of some of those major international actors, and the United States in that regard being the most important supporter of the state of Israel, makes this broader recognition much harder to do. For over 80%
Yeah.
of the UN members, Palestine is already a state. They already recognize it, Palestine as a state, but there would have to be, if a two-state solution is then found, much more work to be done in terms of the territorial control, the arrangements around the
Yeah.
two-state solution, and the broader recognition of
All right.
important global powers.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That's Gustavo de Carvalho, who is from the South African Institute of International Affairs. Perfectly explained, and I thank you for that in terms of what the laws are. The Montevideo Convention is what governs this area. But of course, as Gustavo was explaining, a lot of it is political and diplomatic, and the decisions are being made state by state in relation to this question.